Hi there. I'm Mikaria Drake, and today we're going to be talking about dyeing fabric. So, my when I did my newsletters, I did a whole newsletter about color and cosplay and dyeing fabrics, and so I'm going to go over like the highlights of that newsletter so that I can kind of summarize the important things about dyeing fabric. So, basically, a lot of things we use fabric dyeing for is obviously to change the color of our fabric, but a lot of times it's also for like gradient dyeing and adding effects and things like that. So I wanted to kind of go over some important things when you're purchasing dyes, when you're dyeing, and kind of what you need when you go into dyeing fabric. So one of the first things that you're going to need is like a set of tools that you use specifically for dyeing. So you'll want like a big saucepan or like a pot, and you only use that for dyeing. You wouldn't want to use it for cooking or anything like that. So just have that set aside, and you'd want a pretty big size one for just smaller pieces. You also want to have gloves. So to protect your hands, dye will wash off your skin in a couple of days, but a lot of dyes will dye your nails and they'll stay dyed for weeks. So gloves are a good idea to keep yourself from getting all stained. You're also going to want some sort of stirring utensil. So you want something probably metal, something that isn't going to take all of those dyes. So a spoon or some sort of metal utensil. I also use metal chopsticks a lot so that I can pick up like small pieces and check on the color and see how they're doing. And it's kind of an easy thing. So those are the main things. If you're going to dye a lot of fabric, so, you know, it's not just a piece, but you're dyeing yards of fabric, it's best to do all of your pieces from the same bath, because um, if you try and mix another one, it may be slightly different. I mean, that's the same with buying fabric. If you buy fabric off of a bolt and then you go back later and want to buy it and it's a different bolt, sometimes it can be just a slightly different color. So it's kind of the same idea for when we're dyeing. We want something, all of it in the same bath. So if you want to do something really big, you can get a much bigger tub. So you want like a 10-gallon tamale pot, or you can also get like a big galvanized tub, which is called like a hot dip tub, and it can hold like 16 gallons or more. And you can use like a broom handle or something if you want to stir it all in there. You don't want to use your bathtub. They'll stain it, and your sink, kind of for the same reason. Maybe your stainless steel sink might be okay, but it's best not to dye stuff in places where you wash or eat or drink. So just make sure, like if you're dyeing polyester or like plastic fibers, that dye is meant to dye plastic fibers, which means your linoleum floors, certain countertops, and clothes, and all kinds of stuff. So take precautions and lay down some towels, or cover those spaces to keep it from ruining parts of your kitchen in case you accidentally spill or drip or anything like that. I am such a klutz and I'm so messy, so I'm always try to be careful with stuff like that. So when you're doing like really, really big dyes, when you're doing like in a giant pot or something, you want to make sure that it has space to move around. And it's the same thing with smaller pots. If you cram all of the fabric in there and you're like, oh, it fits because I can just cram it all in there. You want it to have space to move around, because the dye can get trapped in the creases, and that's when you get those like weird dark blotches or spots, and then you can't use that piece. So if that's what's happening, you notice you're dyeing and you're getting like these weird, they look almost kind of like powdery but dark spotches, it means that there's not enough space in the pot. And so you need to get a bigger pot so that you can let that fabric really move around. So those are the things that you would need to get started. Now there's different types of dyes for different types of fabric. So our most common dye that you see in craft stores is RIT, your little boxes, or it comes in like little plastic bottles. And that's for generally, like this particular one is just basic cotton. And it says right on there, cotton wool. It will tell you what kind of fabric you want. So for cotton, linen, or hemp, that regular RIT dye works perfectly fine. There's lots of other brands. There's like Dharma and Jacquard, all that sort of stuff, all those different types of brands. And those work just fine. But I feel like RIT is the one that we see like everywhere and is the easiest to access and to get. These dyes, when you're just dyeing cotton, is basically just your dye, some soda ash, or I'm sorry, not soda. I'm gonna read it because I think it's really just like dye, water, and you can put salt in there, I think. And you don't need to heat up the water. It's just a basic, water dye sort of situation. When you get into other types of materials, so like silk, nylon, polyester, wool, there's different types of dyes for those. So silks especially and polyesters have different types of dyes. My favorite place to buy dyes for a wide range of fabric is Dharma Trading Company, and they have just a ridiculously wide array of different kinds of dyes, and they even have whole like downloadable books where it'll teach you how to use their dyes, how to do different techniques with their dyes. They're super great and pretty affordable, but just such a wide range. And I've used them for decades. They've been around for a long time, and they're just a really great site for you to experiment, to learn about different types of dyes. I highly recommend checking them out and looking. And they have so many colors. Excuse me. So if you are dyeing like a wool or a silk or a nylon, those kind of dyes have to be heated. So they have to be heated up to like 100 or 130 degrees Celsius. So you're going to need to put it on your stovetop or heat it up somehow. And so that's when you would want like a saucepan. It's harder to dye big lots with hot, trying to make it hot. But you're going to measure 2 to 4% of the dry weight when you're doing wool in the dye powder, because the powder comes in kind of like these tubs, and you just kind of scoop it out and measure it. And you fill the pot with enough water so that the wool can move around, and you just stir well. Then when you add the wool to the pot, then you bring it to a simmer, and you have to add citric acid or vinegar. So one of those two things. And then you maintain the temperature to just below boiling, stirring occasionally for about 30 minutes. And you turn off the heat and let it cool, and then pull the wool out and wash it. The problem with wool is that without that citric acid or vinegar, it's not going to take the fabric or the color, and it'll be super, super light. And that's basically what happens if you try to use like a cotton dye with a polyester or one of those other kinds of fabric, is it might take some of the color depending on if it's a blend of materials or what color the dye is, but it will be so light you'll like barely notice that it did anything. So that's why you need to use a different type of dye for those materials. And if you're curious, a lot of this has to do with the pH levels of the water. And so in the newsletter, I do have a little bit information about pH, because it's kind of the science behind why you do different things with different material. For polyester dyes, which I think is like the most common thing that we use, or the most common fabric that we dye, that also has to be heated up. And with that, it's kind of the same thing. You're going to dissolve the dye into a cup of lukewarm water and then add that solution to your bigger pot of water. And then you're going to add something called a dispersing agent, and that's something like you would buy on the Dharma Trading Company site. And after that, you're going to bring it to a boil and maintain that temperature for 30 minutes. Then allow that back to cool. Oh, I'm sorry. I forgot to mention to add the fabric. Add the fabric first and then stir and then let it cool. But you're basically going to have to heat it up and stir it in there and pull it out. But it's the same thing where you would have to have it on a stovetop. So really the only one that you don't have on a stovetop is for cotton, linen, or hemp fabrics. Otherwise, you're going to be boiling water and you're going to be working with hot water. So make sure that you're using the right precautions for that. Again, I have this, and it's a lot of scientific information, and I don't want to just read you directions. So if you go to my Patreon, there's like step by step and lots of directions on the newsletter itself. But I just want to emphasize how important it is to use the correct dye for the correct material. And I'm sorry, my voice is getting a little dry. Now, oftentimes we buy fabric from like SAS or a warehouse, or maybe it's just fabric that we've had lying around forever and you have no idea what that fabric is. So is this fabric polyester? Is it cotton? Is it a blend? Like, I'm not sure what even is this fabric because I've had it forever or for whatever reason. And if you're not sure what your fabric is, you can do something called a burn test, which is basically you cut a small square of your material and you light it on fire. Obviously, be careful about doing this, but you're just going to light the corner and just see how it ignites and how it burns. If it is a natural fiber, so something like cotton, linen, or hemp or something, it's going to burn and it's going to kind of smell like paper. And it'll be like ashy and kind of flaky, and it will look like it has burned, almost kind of like paper burns. It'll have a scorch mark, like that sort of thing. If it is not a natural material, so if it is polyester or viscose or something like that, nylon, instead of, it'll ignite really fast and it will like burn big for a minute and then come down very quickly, and then it will melt. So it'll look like plastic melting. So that's a pretty easy way to tell whether it's a natural fiber or a plastic fiber based on how it burns. So obviously you don't want to do this like in a store if you want to check to see what kind of material it is. But if you already own that material and you're trying to figure out what kind of dye to use, that's a really easy method. If you Google burn test for fabric, there's some sites that go into ridiculous detail about how to tell the difference for each individual one. So if you're not sure if it's a blend of materials, because, there are, wool polyester blends or things like that. And then in that case, it's going to be a little bit more difficult to figure out what kind of dye you want to use. If it's partially polyester, you will always want to use a polyester dye. And you will always want to do a test patch before you start dyeing. So you're always going to want to prepare a smaller dye bath and test the material in the dye and make sure that it's taking the way you want, that it looks the way you want. Also, sometimes you might need, like you have a blue fabric and you just want it to be slightly darker. So it might be a little tricky to figure out what kind of blue you want to use to make it just slightly darker. So you might need to buy a couple different kinds of blue and test each one of those to see, because you can dye over already colored fabrics. It's just might always look like what you want it to look like. If it's kind of in the same color wheelhouse, then you can dye over it. But if it's like a blue and you're trying to make it orange, that's not going to work. It's just going to be kind of brown. So you need to know kind of your color theories and testing everything out and make sure that that's what you want it to look like. Another really popular technique that people do in cosplay and in dyeing is ombre dyeing. And so in my newsletter, there's a whole page on ombre and dip dyeing. And so this is basically a technique. It takes a little bit of practice and for you to figure out the best way that you like doing it. The main thing is you're going to want your fabric to be wet. And let me explain first that ombre or dip dyeing is where it is lighter on one side and then much darker on the other side. So it's kind of like a beautiful ombre effect going from a beautiful dark color to the same color but much lighter. We see that on a lot of costumes and in a lot of fan art. So, and it's a really fun technique to do. So basically, you want to use your tub maybe a little bit bigger than you might normally use. And it's all about literally dipping the fabric in and pulling it out. So there's a couple of different ways to do this. Like I said before, if you already have a blue and you want it to be much darker, but you want like a gradient or an ombre, I mean, then you can use the blue color and get a darker blue dye. And basically, and this would be the same technique regardless of what kind of fabric you're using, but you would create the dye bath and then dip your fabric in, but don't let it go all the way. So you're gonna put it in there and leave as much untouched fabric as you want for the lighter part of the gradient. And then you're going to slowly take out a little bit at a time. And you want the fabric to be wet because what happens if it's dry is then you get straight lines of where the dye was. But if the fabric is wet, then it's going to travel into the threads and disperse. And so that way you don't create any hard lines. Everything is very gradual and even. So you just lift it up a little bit at a time until, so the part on the bottom that's been sitting in the pot the entire time you've been doing this will be the darkest part of it. And that way it'll be from dark to light. And you can do that with regular colored fabric, or you can do it with the white fabric and have a color that goes from very light to very dark. If you are unfamiliar and you've never done this before, definitely do some testing. Just cut some long strips and see, what it looks like. And you can do this technique with cotton dyes and polyester dyes, with any kind of dyes. It works the same way. So if you want to do like two very different colors, or you want to do like blue on one side and orange on one side, you're going to want to make sure that those are far enough apart so they don't overlap too much, because then contrasting colors are going to muddy each other when they blend into each other. So you can also get something called a fabric resist if you're working with dyes, or where you can basically create hard lines with this resist in the material and the dye will not pass through those lines. So that's something else you can get on Dharma or any other dye site, but it's called a resist, and they use it a lot in silk painting and in dyeing and fabrics. So you could also use that. If you need bulk dyes, Dharma Trading Company is a great place for that. They also sell silks and fabric paints. So if you need like Habatai silk, which is a really fine, and they have it in different thicknesses, so you can buy different thicknesses of it, and it comes in all kinds of different colors. It's really great for light flowy skirts, scarves, things like that, if you can imagine what kind of silk that is. So again, there's a whole page on my newsletter of ombre dyeing, so you can go through it and look at more at the measurements and the techniques and the step-by-steps of how to do that. But that's kind of the highlight reel there. The other dyeing that you can do is natural. Sorry, my camera's moving because my cat is walking on my desk. Uh, is you can also use natural dyes. So if you're a big fan of doing things naturally, there is a whole page on my newsletter devoted to natural dyes and tea and coffee dyeing. So natural dyes are basically colors. It's kind of like henna, but it's from plants, insects, barks, things like that. Um, Natural dyes are used with something called a mordant, which is aluminum acetate. And what you would purchase alum and add it to the bath. And what that does is it gives more muted tones on plant fibers like cotton and rayon, but more brilliant on wools and silks. So um, there's a lot of different things that they use for natural dyes. Beets, like red cabbage for purple, black beans for blues, turmeric for yellows, and those sort of things. And you basically chop it up, fill a stock pot with water, sprinkle in some salt, bring to a boil, and simmer for an hour so that all that color comes out. Then you are going to remove the food, and then you have your natural dye. And you'd want that fabric to sit in that natural dye for a while, like an hour to as long as like overnight, to get it to really set into the fabric. And it depends on the color you want. If you want a really dark, strong color, like let it sit in there. Tea and coffee dyeing, you need a lot of tea bags. If you're trying to tea dye something, you want about 10 to 20 tea bags, a lot. And of course water, and you're going to need some salt and some white vinegar. And you're basically, for 1 yard of fabric, that would be like your 10 to 20. And you want black tea, make sure you're using black tea bags. You can also use a printed fabric that has white or another color to make that white more of a beige or a tan color. So when you're doing tea or coffee dyeing, cotton dyes are going to be, or cotton material is going to be what picks it up best. That's when it's most the best way that tea and coffee dyeing will take. And the same with natural dyes. Like, it's going to be cotton. Wool and silk will take it, but it might not be. You want to do some testing to see, because it's going to react different to different types of material. So for tea, it's the same thing. You want it to simmer for an hour. Really let it become dark, and put the fabric, let it sit, and it will lighten. And this is kind of the same for all materials. Like, it might not be the same color after it dries. So before you decide, let that material dry completely so that you can see what the color is, instead of, thinking that this is what it is when it's wet, because most materials are darker when they're wet. So you want to make sure that you let it dry completely before you decide if this is, what you want or not. So there's a whole, if you want to do tea dye, and I have had a lot of people tea dye. A lot of times, if you have something that's like a really light color and you get a stain on it, I've had friends that have tea dyed the entire dress, or to kind of blend that stain in, and it's worked for them. So that's kind of a fun idea. If you don't want to, if you can't get rid of a stain that's just like really just slightly dark, and you could tea dye the whole thing to match it. So if you want a whole breakdown of how to do the coffee and tea dyeing, because you can also use coffee too, again, the directions are in this newsletter. This newsletter that I did has a lot of like science and instructions in it. So I'm not going to go through all the like the measurements and all that sort of stuff, but it is on there as step-by-steps, and then you can use that. I think I've gone over most of the things that I wanted to talk about. I know we have a lot of stuff coming up, and I have Sabaton is next weekend, and I will be there hosting the gala, which is a cosplay gala on Friday night. It's at 8 o'clock, and our theme is Pokemon this year. So if you're already attending Sabaton, you can either purchase tickets by logging into their website, and then you can purchase tickets. You can't just purchase them from the website. And I'm also hosting the fashion show on Saturday night. So if you're already going to those things, or if you're already going to Sabo, and you are, though I'm hosting those two events, and you can see me, or please come to them and check it out. The gala is Pokemon themed, and we have fun goodie bags for everybody, so should be a good time. And then UuCon is in October, so we're just like going right along with all kinds of fun stuff. So I hope that you are having a great weekend, and hopefully you are finished with your costumes. I know I'm not. So so but I didn't see any questions or anything about this. Oh, look, you can see my cat. That's Mrs. Wallace. She's my kitty cat.
She's so cute. Just like the whole time, I'm like, I want to pet the kitty.
Yeah, we have very deep set windows in our craft room. And we have a lot. Like, you can kind of see the ones behind me. There's 3 here. In front of me, there's 3 more. So we have 6 windows on this room, and they're big, deep set windows. So my cat is always laying on all the windowsills in here. And she walks over all of my...
She knows how to take advantage. She just knows how to take advantage. That's all.
Oh, I would too if I was her. So it's a great room. It has a lot of light. But but yeah, and if you have any questions as far as anything cosplay related, I'm on Instagram under Mikaria_Drake, and you can always message me there. You can follow me on there, and I just mostly post about costumes on there. So if you have any questions or about events we run, or costuming, or wig styling, or sewing, you can always message me there, and I will get back to you very quickly. But thank you so much for joining me today. Sorry I was kind of rushed. I know we're just all doing, we have so much stuff coming up, and my brain is like panicking. So I hope that you have a great weekend, and that this was informative, or at least gave you some ideas about what to explore with creating different colors and dye. There's so much fun in fabric painting and fabric dyeing. It's like silk painting and all that stuff. It's really fun, and to be able to play with different colors and different materials. So I encourage you to give it a shot and to try something different, try something new with it. There's all kinds of different methods. So you can use ice to dye. You can really get into like fun, like t-shirt dyeing. So tie dyeing and all that, batik dyeing, like it's just, there's a lot of fun things you can do. So hopefully this inspired you to do some research, or to look into different methods, to try something out. I hope it did. And then I'll be streaming again next month with a new topic, and so we'll let you know coming up what that is. And I hope you have a great day, and have fun at your next con, and I will see you next time. So thank you very much, and have a great day.